And we are live. G'day everyone, Mike Jeffrey here, and you are listening to My Creative Journey, Season 2, Episode number 1. And we are finally here, folks. After 903 days, we are finally back with another episode of the podcast. If you are new here, I want to say thank you so much for coming along and giving up a bit of time out of your day to listen, to watch what I have to say in this episode. You know, it is massive for me to be back recording this podcast again. If you don't know, I started this podcast back in 2021, before I'd even started wedding photography. It was a bit of a way for me to be able to document my own creative journey and the things that I was going through at the time, starting my photography business and starting to go into wedding photography. So it was really nice for me to be able to document it. But I eventually, after a year and a little bit of recording episodes, really ran out of time, you know, to keep up episodes every single week. And as you'll probably hear, if you go back to that last episode of season 1, I did get a job working in a cafe back then, and things really started to snowball from there, and my business really did start to take off, and I was running out of time to do episodes. And you know, I always wanted to bring the podcast back, but it just never felt like the right time. And for me, it's really exciting to be back here today, because one of the things that I really loved about the first season of the podcast was having it as something that, you know, was really tangible, journal almost in a way of me and my business. So to be able to bring that back now to where I am at the moment in my business and be able to have other people on is really special. But I want to tell you a little bit about how I decided to start this podcast up again, because I think that's a interesting story to go into. So a couple of months ago, I got a message from Sam Cousins, who is a local photographer in Sydney, Australia, where I'm based. Now, I did not know Sam from a bar of soap, but he reached out to me and he wanted to interview me for a project that he was working on. I said, absolutely, I'd love to jump on, you know, always interested when anyone reaches out and says that they want to hear from me. So I thought that was so special, and I was honored to be able to be interviewed in that way. And Sam really came through and gave a great interview and asked a lot of great questions. He's a photographer as well, so we were having a great chat in that interview, and we were going back and forth, and I thought, you know what, like, this is such a great conversation that I could be having with so many different people. You know, I was so honored to be a part of the project that he was working on and to be asked to be interviewed. I thought, why not just reach out to some other people and ask them if they would love to be on a podcast that I could start. You know, that was always a dream of mine. If you go back and listen to the first season of the podcast, was to have it as interviews, was to do interviews with other people in the creative space. But I could just never bring myself probably to actually reach out to people. It probably wasn't so much that other people wouldn't have wanted to be on the podcast. It was probably me holding myself back a little bit and not reaching out to as many people as I possibly could. But I think now, in the stage that I'm in life and in business, that I'm a lot more comfortable to reach out to people, and I have a lot of great connections that I can draw from. And to be able to give those episodes to other people, I thought, and those conversations that I'm having on a day-to-day basis on Instagram, or whether I'm just talking to people, and the people that I'm able to meet through creativity and through the communities that I'm in, are so special. And so to be able to give those to other people, I just think is amazing. And I really wanted to do that. And it wasn't until Sam actually interviewed me as a part of his project that I thought, wow, I could really do that as well. And so I wanted to start the podcast off after that interview, and I thought I could record just a solo episode of myself coming back and just talking like we are now about what it is I want to do for this whole season of the podcast. And I did record an episode twice, actually. The first one didn't work out. The audio went really bad. And the second episode, I just didn't really enjoy it. You know, I didn't really enjoy recording by myself again like I had done in the first season. If you go back and listen to all 56 episodes of that first season, I think like 54 of them are just by myself, half hour to an hour long episodes all by myself. I don't know how I drag myself up to do that every single week, but that wasn't something that I was enjoying anymore. And I thought, why do I need to put a solo episode out? I have a great interview about myself with Sam. So I reached out to Sam and said, can I use that interview as an episode of the podcast? And he said, absolutely. And I'd love to be able to put that out in the world. So here it is today, on today's episode. And I thought, what a better way to start off the next season of the podcast in an interview with me, talking about my own journey from an outsider asking me questions, which is much better than just listening to me ramble on for an hour about my own journey. Who knows what that episode was, but we're so glad that we got here today. I just want to say before we jump into this episode, I just want to say what an honor and a privilege it is, to be able to bring this podcast back. I'm very aware of the position that I'm in and that I'm able to have this podcast, be able to host it and be able to do it in the way that I'm able to do it. It's very different to what you'll see in the first season, but I also am proud to keep that first season there as a journal. I thought long and hard about whether I should start a brand new podcast or continue it on, just add another season onto the podcast that I already had back then. And I really wanted to keep that as a journal because I think it's so important to really show the growth over time, because for me, that was everything when I first started that podcast. I was doing so much stuff, but I was in a very different space to where I am now. And to be able to look back on that and say that I never gave up and that I did continue on is so special. So I hope that if you do go back and listen to any of those episodes, they are able to provide a little bit of value. Do be warned, they're probably not as clean and as polished as this season is going to be, but they still hopefully can provide you a bit of value if you are at that stage where you're just starting your own creative journey. But season 2 is going to be super different. I'm going to be bringing on guests each and every week. We're hoping to have a lot of guest interviews in this season from a bunch of different people in all different creative spaces. That's what my creative journey has always been about. I want to interview people from all different creative walks of life and understand about their creative journey and what it is that drives them and how they started their creative businesses and what they're doing creatively that keeps them going each and every week. And I think that there's so much we can draw from other people. Just because they're not doing the same skill that we're doing day in, day out, doesn't mean there aren't things that we can draw from, doesn't mean there's not a different way of doing things, a different mindset that they come in with, a different perspective that we don't have in our particular niche, our industry. So loving having these conversations, and I hope that you guys, are as well. The episodes are also a lot more polished. I've got intro music. I've got an edit on this podcast. I have a video podcast. You guys may be actually watching this as a video. I have it up on YouTube, on Spotify as well. If you are watching the video, go out and check that intro that I did, that little bit of a skit at the start of the episode. I'm loving that I'm able to have this extra creative outlet and give a lot more than I ever could on my Instagram videos. It's a really long form content where I'm able to explain a lot more about me and really be a lot more of myself over the course of an hour to, however long these episodes go. So there are 2 other episodes out today after this one. There'll be episode 2 and 3 will also come out the same day as episode number 1. So go and have a listen to those and then get ready for a lot more episodes to come in the future, hopefully on a weekly basis. But with all that said, I want to give a massive shout out to Sam. I'll leave a link to him and all of his details down below. A great photographer. We'll definitely get him on an episode of the podcast as well. He did such a great job with this interview and I'm super happy with the way that it turned out. So I'll get Sam back on to talk about his journey as well, because I know that we didn't get to ask him much about what he actually does, but he has a really incredible story as well. So do let me know and I will try to get him back on as soon as possible, and go give him some love, because this episode was super interesting and such a great conversation, and he asked so many great questions, even though he didn't have any clue that this was for this podcast. So thank you so much to Sam. But without further ado, let's jump into this episode. And I hope you enjoy listening to this conversation half as much as I enjoyed having it.
Hey Mike. We're here with Mike today. Thank you so much for joining us. Could you give us an overview of your job title? Because I know there's a couple of different things in there.
Well, hello guys. My name is Mike and I am a photographer, also a content creator online these days. I don't know, it's a very weird sort of job title to really have that, but that is how I spend most of my time these days, as well as still doing photography and having my own business in photography as well.
Perfect. And this is the question I always like to ask people. Did you think back in high school that you were going to be a photographer / content creator?
Not at all. I didn't even know what a content creator was. I don't think that was even around when I was in high school. As a photographer, no, I didn't have that sort of dream at all. I was not the artsy type in school. I was the opposite end of the spectrum. I actually wanted to be, of all things, wanted to be an astrophysicist in school. So it was very much the opposite end of the spectrum. Had no idea that I was going to be going into photography, but here we are.
Yeah, great. And for yourself, what sort of photography do you specialize in, and what sort of content creation are you specializing in?
Cool. So I do a lot of different styles of photography. My really specialization is I do wedding photography. I do a lot of portrait photography as well, do a bit of landscapes, do a whole range of other stuff. I'm always like, if I enjoy it, I'm happy to go take photos of it. So I like to do a lot of different things, but mainly in my business is around wedding photography, and then also creating content around that about how to start as a wedding photographer, but also more generally how to start as a photographer and what skills you need to be a photographer, but also how to run a photography business. So I think that's really helpful insights that I have to give to people.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. I'm gonna touch on that a lot later, but before we get to all of that sort of stuff, sort of want to rewind and go through the career journey. So you started off in high school thinking astrophysicist, correct? Did I pronounce that correctly?
You did. It's a big one. Yeah.
And did you complete high school and then move on to uni, or what did that sort of look like?
I did. So I completed high school and went to uni. Yeah, I did go to uni. So I went to uni, did a undergraduate in maths and science, of all things. Yeah, so I was very much on that journey. I was kind of debating between engineering and going to do like pure maths and pure science, and went down the pure maths, pure science route. So was doing that and then got all the way to the end of my degree and actually graduated. So it's pretty crazy end of a kind of spin on that to then go into photography, but I'm sure we'll expand on that. But yeah, that was where I was at the end of school. You know, I was thinking like I didn't really know what I wanted to do, but going to uni was the option, right? So, you know, everyone else went to uni. I didn't have a year off between. I just went straight in because I really enjoyed being able to study at school. I loved my HSC. I loved completing year 12, and then going into uni just seemed like the next logical step for me. And I think I just followed those markers, you know, that everyone has moving through career journey and hoping to work it out as you go.
Yeah. And you said you sort of were tossing up between a couple of different degrees that you wanted to do. I feel like a lot of people go through that transition in high school into uni. How did you decide on the one that you went with?
I think for me, I did a lot of research and I spoke to a lot of different people. For me, it was more about what I was most interested in. I never really saw, and I think that may have played a bit of a role further on down the track, but I never really pictured the end career. It was more, where am I right now and what am I most interested in? So for me, I really loved the actual like learning style of being in school, and learning like maths was really interesting to me. So I went down that route of like, I want to learn as much as I possibly can about a particular area. I'm not considering how that comes into practicality in actually having a career in it, but I just really enjoyed the idea of studying it. So I was like, let's go down and learn as much as I possibly can. And going into maths and going into astrophysics was something that I really loved. So I was like, let's just go in there and you know, throw myself in. I could always change afterwards. I wasn't ever scared to change, but I was like, that seemed like the most logical route for me.
And within that whole degree, did you do any internships within, I guess, the field that you were wanting to go in, or were you just completely focused on studying?
No, so really there's not, and I don't know much in other professions, but in those kind of like sciences and the pure sciences, pure maths type of stuff, there's not a lot of actual career outside of education, right? So you're doing a lot of study to then do more study and to then do more research. That was the aim, right? To go down and to do a lot of like research in that type of stuff, that hopefully you're doing my like post-grad and then going and doing research afterwards. So it was kind of being on research projects, speaking with other people who were in that. There's not a lot of interning in that because there's no industry really. So I wasn't working as like as an experimental scientist. It was more sort of theoretical stuff. So most of those careers would be at universities. So yeah, I was really doing a lot of research and being on research groups and that type of stuff. And I think the more I got into that, the more I started to realize, hey, this is it. Like there's nothing else other than this. Like this is the only option that I've got if I go down this small little hole that I'd sort of contain myself in for the first 3 years of university.
Yeah. Wow. And so you've graduated.
Yep.
And then what was next? Did you like, what was your first job outside of graduating?
So I graduated at the end of 2019. And anyone knows that what happened at the end of 2019, early 2020, got hit by a pandemic. So I didn't actually have a job straight out of uni. I kind of, for the last sort of probably 6 months of the degree, had made my mind up that I didn't want to go into the profession and didn't want to continue into postgraduate, because really to go into the profession, there wasn't much I could really get with the undergraduate. I had to go down and do postgraduate study. And I'd made my mind up that wasn't something that I was going to do. So I just decided that I'll end my undergraduate and we'll kind of see where we go. I was, at that point, had started photography just as a hobby. It was something that I was sort of experimenting in. I'd been on a couple of holidays, in 2019, had a camera with me, and I was like, I enjoy this, so let's try that. So after I graduated, in that first couple of months of 2020, before the pandemic really hit, I started my photography business. I was like, let's just start it and see where we go. Like, I'll start it and I'll try and get some work going. I had a couple of projects sort of booked in, and then everything closed down. So that was a really interesting time for me, sort of learning how to start a business, but then also like being at home and then having to sort of do all the other work without being able to get a lot of practical work in. Very interesting time.
Yeah, that's a very unfortunate timing. Let me wrap my head around this a bit more. So last 6 months, you've realized, look, postgraduate's going to be X amount of time that I'm going to have to invest in. Then the job that I'm going to be in is probably going to be a uni lecturer or something along those lines. Probably not what you wanted to go down. Started experimenting with photography, found a passion for it. Then a lot of people want to start a photography business. Like they want to do it. Obviously, you're very, I would say, analytical in your approach, very researched in how you went about it. Did you do a similar sort of process when you thought, I'm going to start a photography business?
I did, and it was almost like I was thrown into it, considering like the circumstances, right? So I never planned it to be my only thing in the beginning. Like I was always like, I just start this and I'll do this extra, and I was still trying to work out what I wanted to do. But then I think during all the time we had in sort of 2020, in being able to just be inside and have a lot of time to really think about things, I got to a point where I was like, why not just try this as my only thing, And so I had a lot of time then, as you said, to do the research and to do a lot of that work in the back end of business to understand what's this all about, right? I'd never been a creative before. I'd never run my own business. So I was just doing a lot of like research, doing a lot of learning off other people, trying to see what I could get in order to work out, how do I start this? What do I need? What do I need to start? What do I need in terms of a business? How do I actually structure a business? And all those types of things. So yes, it was analytical, but also I kind of just threw myself in and was like, look, I'm sure there are so many other people that are making this work. I can surely make it work. And so I think that was the best approach for me, because had I have been too planned, I think I probably wouldn't have started. If you had all the information when you started, I don't think you would. So, I'm glad that I did when I did.
Yeah, and that's a awesome, I think, mentality to have is, rather than going, so many other people are doing this, the market's saturated, you sort of flipped it and said, well, if everyone else is doing it, why can't I? And that's such a, I think, positive way to go into it. And like you said, there's lots of different things that you need to do to run a business. What would you say your key learnings or key takeaways that you could advise people of, hey, if you're looking into doing it, look at this, and this. These are the major things that you need before you get it up and running.
For me, it was really like I had no sense of like financial stuff. Like I didn't really understand finances as much as I understood. Like I could do, I could add up, but apart from that, I didn't really understand what finance was. So I think making sure that was down pat first and foremost. Like I did a lot of work to get my business sort of structured and get all my finances in place. Invoicing, having my own bank account, and then also outsourced to having, an accountant who could go and like look after that stuff for me, because I was like, look, I don't want that to be a stress. I don't want that to hold my business down. I want to get that to someone who is an expert in that area, right? Like I was very, very much aware that wasn't my strength. So making sure that I gave that to someone else so that I could free up my time to learn a lot of other different things, because I still had to learn how to be a photographer. And then a lot of other things like just learning how to actually work with other people. I think that was a big thing for me. Having been quite an introverted person, having been at uni, not in the most extroverted career path, learning how to work with other people, how to answer emails, how to understand what people are saying to you when they're not actually saying anything. So that was a big thing to me to learn early on. And then also like structuring automations in business was a big thing for me as well. How to actually get inquiries, how to have a business out there in the world, how to market it to get people through. I think that's probably the most important thing that I do in my business right now. That's like I really wish I had that back then. If no one actually knows about your business or no one knows that you're in business, then they can't inquire with you, then they can't actually book with you, and then you have no work. So that's the most important thing to get down pat. It doesn't matter how skilled you are as a photographer or any artist or in any sort of business. If you don't have any work, it doesn't really matter. So you've got to be able to, advertise to get clients through the door.
Yeah. No, yeah, fantastic. Lots to unpack there, which I love. But that last bit really reminds me of, I think it was, I don't know if I saw it in a cartoon or something, but when somebody gets 3 wishes from a genie and they wish for all the talent in the world, but then you see them just like a lonely painter in an attic, poor, because they wished for talent rather than fame and money. So it reminds me of that when you say you can be a great photographer or an artist or a creative, but if you're not marketing yourself, then you're not going to be able to do it professionally. The thing I wanted to touch on first was because I feel like a lot of people are in a similar space where they're introverted and they're passionate about something that they want to go into, but a lot of it's going to involve, dealing with other people, client interaction, stakeholder engagement, whatever coin you want to give it. You said that you learnt about it. Can you give me a bit more of an insight how you overcame it and what that learning was and what that looked like?
I think the big thing for me was I suppose like an understanding that when you go into a business, you are in control. And I think that was one of the best things for me starting my own business as opposed to working for someone else. Because when I'm starting my own business, realizing that I can choose how I want to do things. So I don't have to, answer the phone calls if I don't really want to answer phone calls. I don't have to go stand out on the street and scream at people to try to advertise myself. I can just do online advertising. I don't have to do things the way other people do it. And I think speaking to people and learning that everyone is doing things their own way, I think was the most empowering thing for me in realizing that there's not just one way to do this. There's more than one way that I could go about being in business, about how I can answer my emails. I don't have to be scripted every time I say something. I can just be me. I can just be who I am, and I'm going to attract the clients that really resonate with me. And there is enough, as you said, there's enough out there to sort of go around. And having that was really like empowering in the beginning, because it's like, well, wow, I can just be myself here. I don't have to pretend to be anyone else. I don't have to go by the rules that other people have. Of course, it's nice to sort of learn a bit about your business and how other people run businesses. But at the end of the day, you can choose to do what you like and choose to not do other things that you don't like. So yeah, that was a big thing for me. And so I've kind of sort of played into my strengths over the years of like, I know what I do well and I know what I don't do well. So, outsourcing the things that I don't do well is a huge thing, but also like only going down the paths of trying to work with the types of people who I really like to work with. I've strategically chosen for myself to do wedding photography because I like working with, everyday sort of people. I don't like working with big organizations and big clients who don't really value me as an artist as much. And I love to be able to give back to other people and to have a feeling like I'm really impacting someone is a really special thing. So I love to be able to give art to other people in that way. So I've chosen to work in a market with other people who really respect that. So, I think that is one of the biggest things of understanding that everyone goes about things their own way, and you can choose to do things however you want.
Yeah. Yeah. Love that. Love that. And so was your first job or client that you secured, was it a wedding?
No, it wasn't. So I started doing family photography because I knew a few people. That was like, I was like, yep, I'm going to go do family photography. As soon as I sort of started posting that I was doing photography, I got a few people sort of reach out as well. And I think family photography is one of those big ones where people have to have or feel like they have to have family photos every year. So there's a lot of people out there who want family photos. So I was like, I'm offering it, and they're happy to sort of come through the door. So that was something that I started offering. And I quickly learned that wasn't something that I enjoyed. I quickly learned that working with small children is just not for me. And so I'm glad I went through that to experience it, but I only did probably 3. And then I realized, no, this is not for me. And so
it's a tough job.
Yeah.
I did it for 4 to 5 years.
Wow. 4 or 5 years, not
Yeah, I was a children and family studio photographer so when I got out of school, I did multimedia, then I went and did a bit of a photography course at Ultimo TAFE, but then I felt that it was, I guess I was sort of opposite to you. I wasn't very analytical. It was too much theory for me.
Yep.
So then I went and got a job in children and family studio photography as an assistant. And then after 6 months, got promoted to photographer. Did that for a couple of years for some people, started my own business, did that for a couple of years, then went back and worked for other businesses. And then after, I think it was the 4 or the 5 year mark, I had the same realization of you where I was like, this is just too hard.
You must have really like enjoyed it in the start then. Like if you were just working under someone else, then you're like, oh, this is actually something that I would like to do. And you like moved up in it.
Yeah, I think it was, I wish I sort of did what you did. So photography was my passion, still is my passion. But then I think what I did is the only job back then, because I was too scared to start my own business. And this is why I love that we're having this conversation. So people who were like me and too scared to take that leap, like I just latched on to anything that I could that was photography.
Yep.
So, it was children, family, studio photography. And like, kids are great. Like they're really fun to be around. You can get some really expressive, photography, but it can be very hard because kids can flip a switch and they can, have a meltdown. Yeah. So I think if I look back on it, I just went, okay, well, I'm a photographer, I'm doing what I love. But I wasn't, because I was doing a part of photography that I did not love. So it's really interesting to see your how you did it for, like you said, 3 or 4 shoots and then go, I'm moving on.
It is interesting because I think I hear from a lot of people of like, just start in any way you can in the craft. And I hear a lot of people like throw out online, like as you're just starting, if you're starting a business, maybe try to get another job in that industry as well. Like try to work in the industry alongside starting your own business. So you're having experience in your other job, right? So you're earning an income through that. I get a lot of people tell me to work in like in the beginning, a lot of people were telling me to work in like a camera store, to go work under someone else, go work in a studio. And I was like, I don't want to spend my other time working for someone else. Like I want it. And I actually did have another job in the early stages. I was working in like hospitality and that type of stuff. But I really was like, I want that to be removed. Like I don't want that to creep on the work that I'm doing in my own business, because I felt that was going to like burn me out too fast. Like if I was spending all my time around photography in the beginning, especially doing something that I didn't enjoy as much in photography, I would have been like, as I said, if I had all the information at the start, I probably wouldn't be here. Had I have had that insight into the industry in the beginning, I might have been like, oh, this industry is not for me. But not had the awareness to realize that was only a small slice, So interesting to see that you went into it and like were like very heavily working in that space.
Oh yeah, it was. I did get burnout. I think so. I had a similar thing to you, but I did it for 2 years. Met another photographer who I worked in the children and family space, like in the studios, and I then poached him and said, "Hey, let's go run our own business," and did that for around 2 years. But neither of us at that time were very savvy when it came to marketing. Like I was living at home, so I was comfortable.
Yep.
Right. Like, but my parents were nice enough to be like, if you're starting your own business, we're going to support it. You can, run the studio out of our garage if you pay for the renovations, and then go work part-time as a bartender. And then I think because I created that business because all I knew was children and family studio photography, I wasn't really doing it for the passion. I was more doing it for hey, I've seen that my bosses in my previous roles have made some good money. I would love to just make money off photography. Yep. And then I did exactly what you said you tried to avoid, and I burnt out. Mm-hmm. Like I completely burnt out because it wasn't creative enough for me. What you had to do was take a photo of family together, then kids together, and then individuals. Like it felt more of like I was photographing a shopping list rather than getting to be creative. And funny enough, I burnt out so much that I think I took a year off all photography after I did it, and then I transitioned into sales.
Wow.
So I think you made the right choice of not getting burnt out.
Yeah, I'm glad that I mean, everyone has their own style, and you've got to do what is like right for you, because of course the most important thing is being able to have an income, right? Like if you don't have that in the beginning, it doesn't really, like you can have as much drive as you would like, but it doesn't, if you're not having any clients in the beginning, it doesn't really matter. So you've got to do what you can to actually make ends meet. But I'm glad that I didn't go down that path of like working in the industry, and tried to keep as much as I could out of it, because I was like, then I could grow. And I think that's another good point of like, in the beginning, I never wanted to work under another person. I don't know. I never felt that was for me. So I never learnt photography off anyone else. I just started completely from scratch. And I don't really know why. I just think that was something that I always wanted to do. I never saw the need to, work under someone else for X amount of years before I was okay to start myself. I was like, well, I'm in this position now. I may as well start it, and then I'm actually growing everything as we go, because I didn't want to get to the position where I'd worked for someone else for 3 years but didn't have anything else under my own sort of name, and had to go back and then create and then start my own business because I'd only done work for someone else. So yes, the experience would be great, but that would be just like I may as well do that 3 years on my own. And then after I get to that 3-year mark, I'd probably be a lot further ahead than had I worked under someone else for that time. So I was pretty comfortable. I was like, I'm not going to go back and do any sort of study. Why don't I just start? And that will be my study. So I was pretty comfortable in the beginning that I was like, I'm not going to make a whole lot of like income in my photography business. So I was like, I have to get another job. So if I have to do something else, let me do something outside of it so that I really hate that, so that I want to go away from that. So because I was like, let me work in hospitality because I'm not going to enjoy that, but it's not going to drain me either. But I'm not going to be like, oh, it's not going to be a career that I think I really enjoy that. I'm going to stick at it and choose it over photography. So I was like, it'll give me something to work towards, reducing hours in that, to then come back to, actually doing my photography all by myself right from the start. And I think that was something that really did drive me, and I was able to get out of it a lot earlier than I ever planned to because of that. Because I had to had been working to get away from that, as you said.
Yeah, no, that makes complete sense. Whereas I went down the route of, I just want to learn from others, and then I'm going to apply, I guess, that learning into my own, I guess, photography and business and that sort of stuff, which, I look back and I spent a big chunk, it feels like I'm 32 now, but from the age of 19 to 24, it was basically children family studio photography, right? But whilst I was doing that on the side, I was doing things I was more passionate about, like I started weddings, modeling portfolios, that sort of stuff. And I think my first wedding, it was for free. I shadowed somebody else. So I was the second, what they call a second shooter. And, I went through that. So definitely a longer route compared to yourself. I like the sound of yours better. How did you, so for me personally, and I don't know, this could be like other people, I found, hands-on learning from other people in photography, like, they were photographing something and then I'll be like, oh, cool. So why is your lighting like that? Or why are you approaching it in this way? Like for me, that's how I learned. But I find it really interesting that you're like, I started off not learning off like technically shadowing somebody or, working for them. How did you go about your learning?
I did most of it online. So I learned a lot of things, online. I think that was the best way that I knew to learn. I'm not someone that can learn from, like I'm a very visual sort of learner, but I don't think I do well working for someone else because I probably wouldn't ask the questions that I need to ask. Especially in the early stages, I would have probably felt too reserved, as we talked about before, like being a bit introverted. I probably wouldn't have asked the questions that I needed to know, and probably being a little bit insecure that I didn't understand. So being able to learn online, especially during 2020, when we weren't actually doing anything else anyway, we weren't allowed to go out, so everything had to be online. So I was doing a lot of learning, online and trying to gather as much information as I possibly could. I think it was hard because as we talked about before, I was learning how to do photography, but then also how to work as a photographer at the same time. So that was a little bit interesting because it wasn't that I'd come from a background in photography to now learning what do I do at a wedding or other events. How do I take photography at events? What do I do in that sense? I was learning actually how do I actually use my camera, but then also how do I do that as well? So I don't know. I think that was just the best way that worked for me. It was obviously a slow process, and I'm always intrigued by other people. Like when I hear from other people who did learn off someone else, like just like yourself, that must have been probably easier if I like had someone that I knew to ask. Having that would have been great. And I think that's a big reason why I do what I do now in educating online, because I'm like, I wish I had someone just tell me exactly what to do, because there's so much information out there and not all of it actually relates to me directly and what I do. So I'm like, I really gained a lot from learning online. Let me try to help other people in that way, in that space. And so I'm very grateful that there was so much, information to learn, because had I started maybe like 5 to 10 years earlier, there probably wouldn't have been that much information online. Like I probably wouldn't have done that. And so all the things that I tell people today is like, I'm very much aware that this is only able to be done because of the world that we're in at the moment.
Yeah, definitely. When I was, but I know I'm 32, but it still makes me feel old to think back to when I was 19. I don't think that, because I'm assuming when you say you learned online, are you YouTube? Or was that
and like other like course platforms, online. Like a lot of that, and I did a lot of like reading as well. A lot of like blogs from people, like understanding a lot of different things. I think during, as we went into like 2020, there was a lot of like resources going online. A lot of people started educating online right at that exact time when I was starting. So that was probably the perfect environment to start learning online, because a lot of people would, especially people who were doing those sort of workshops in person, all of a sudden transfer them all to being online. So I had all this information, at my disposal, and I had the hours, to be able to spend actually learning that stuff. So yeah, that was really cool.
Yeah, fantastic. And I think what you touched on, I guess, I was lucky in the fact that I'm pretty extroverted. I knew earlier on that I wasn't ever really shy to ask a question, and I was very, I feel very lucky for that. I think the one thing that was harder for me personally is I had that safety net, right, of I'm reporting into somebody, I'm photographing for them. They're sort of telling me what to do. So for me, I always had a lot of like pressure of, if I'm by myself, what if I make a mistake? Like I always had that safety net to fall back on. And I'll always remember I did about 3 or 4 weddings where I was the second shooter because I was still just too scared to go, okay, I think I'm good enough now to go and shoot my own wedding end to end. So I have, the utmost respect for the fact that you're just like, I'm going to learn what I need to learn and then I'm going to go and shoot it, because yes, I was confident enough to ask the questions, but I wasn't confident enough for a long time to take that step into, I guess, being that sole photographer.
It's interesting because it's like, when are you? Like, when do you get to that point? It's so personal. no one knows when, you're actually ready to start anything or when you have enough experience. Like, is that even a word? Like, there are people who get jobs that don't have the experience for the job and they just apply just because they have the amount of confidence to apply and they interview well. Like, when do you get to that stage? So for me, I was like, how about I just start it? Because I think had I have been in your position, I probably would have held out for a lot, probably years and years of being under someone else, because I would have been like, oh, this is way too hard. As I said, I didn't really understand how hard it was. I think I now look back and think, wow, how did I throw myself in with no experience and just go and do that? But I was also in that position where I was like, understood where I was at. And I was also very clear to my clients at the beginning. I did my first 3 for free, and I was very clear to them, like, I don't have any experience, right? I don't have anything apart from they were people who weren't planning to have a photographer because it was way too expensive for them. They were like all around, they were between like 18 to 23. They weren't very old, planning to get married. They didn't have a lot of income. They were just planning to ask their uncle, right? So they was like, well, I can come. I kind of know my way
like,
around.
I'll be your uncle.
Yeah, I'll be that guy, right? Like,
yeah.
And so I didn't feel any overt pressure to do anything. And sort of that was the best environment for me to go in and sort of learn. Because I was like, look, I could work for someone else and be paid not hardly any much, or I could just work for myself and work for free. Yes, I'm working for free, but that sort of builds up my portfolio. And so I'm only growing as my portfolio grows. So I'm not ever promising on something that I know I can't do. Like, I'm not, like, all the work on my website's on my own. So it's not like it's work that I did for someone else at some high end thing that I'm not at that stage yet. I was just growing as I grew. So people knew where I was at, and I was very upfront with that. So I'm glad that I went down that road. It was harder probably in the early stages because I had a lot to learn, but then it also meant that when I did get to the point where I felt like I was okay, and I'm still not sure if I am at that point, but like feeling like you're prepared enough, I was already out on my own. So I was already blazing ahead.
Yeah, great. And I love that you brought up that you did 3 of them for free first, because a lot of people go, look, I want to get into photography. I want to start my business. The first thing that they're going to ask to see usually is your portfolio.
Yep.
And the best way to build up your portfolio, I mean, kind of sucks, but at the same time, it doesn't, because you're getting that experience. And like you said, there's no pressure because you're like, I am doing this for free. That is the best way to get your portfolio up and get the experience. So did you set the goal first of, okay, I'm going to do 3 of them for free, and then boom, I'm going to start charging? Or are you going to go, I'm going to go, and then once I feel comfortable and I'm good, then I'm going to start charging? How did that thought process come about?
I think I actually had my first wedding booked and actually charged before I'd done those 3. So yes, I had decided to do 3. After I did the first one, I posted the photos like straight away. So I did the first one, and then I didn't have another one for like another 3 or 4 months because I couldn't get, like, as you know, like it's a long sort of way in advance when you book that sort of photography. So I had one immediately, which was really strange. Like I like advertised that I was going to start doing it, and I had someone reach out to me and said, I'm getting married in 3 weeks. Can you come along? I was like, yeah, sure, that would be great, because obviously, I didn't expect to get someone until like early the year after, really, because people plan this stuff so far in advance. So I got that one, and then as soon as I did it, I think I turned the photos around in 3 weeks and had them on my website and on my social media. And then someone then reached out, and then I announced that I was then charging, right? And someone reached out, and then I did charge for that one, but that wasn't for another year out. So yeah, I did do 3, but I had charged for one before I'd done those 3.
Yeah. No, that makes complete sense. And how long into that did you then become a content creator? I'm going to link your Instagram in the summary below, so everyone can go check it out, because you've got some extremely helpful tips and tricks on how to get into the industry, how to even, if you're a beginner photographer, where do you start? I mean, for myself, as I mentioned, I was a very hands-on photographer, not so much like practical theory, and I photographed weddings, corporate, modeling portfolios, events, and I watched some of your stuff and I'm like, oh, I didn't know that that's why we do this and why that happens. So, your content is not just for a beginner photographer. It's somebody who, could be seasoned, but not necessarily, I guess, very theory based. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I just think that that's the way that I operate. I think like understanding how things work is my sort of skill in a way. Like, I hear from a lot of people, like, I've been a photographer for years, but didn't know that that's how this worked. And I'm like, wow, like it's interesting that you, from the other perspective as well, like to let people know that you don't necessarily need to know as much as I know to start. Like, I don't want to be putting up that sort of barrier to say you need to understand everything, because there are people, as you said, just like yourself, who don't understand everything. There are things I don't know still. So like being able to put any content out there is great. I started making content. Well, I started from the early days. Like, I think when I first started my business, I was always creating content to advertise my business. It was more that in the beginning. So trying to target my ideal clients and trying to target people who are engaged, planning to get married and that sort of stuff. And it wasn't until like September last year when I was like, look, I want to create a lot more freedom around my business. I want to create another thing that I can do as well. As doing photography, I want to be able to create freedom and create like, not, because I think one of the biggest things for me was the work was like having to be booked so far out. Like, I was getting booked a year in advance. I couldn't actually change things on the fly, and I'd have to be locked into being in a certain like area, certain location, doing wedding photography. I was like, how can I create a bit more freedom and do something online? I was like, look, I could educate around something that I already do. Right? Like, I have a lot of skills. I know more than someone who, I always went into it with like, I know more now than I did when I started. So I can educate someone who was at that stage when I started. So that was my whole idea. And if you've seen my content, or if anyone goes and looks at my content, I've created this sort of back and forth with that person who I was back then. And I think that's always been my idea, where I like ask a question about something that I don't know and I'm genuinely curious. And I think that opens it up to other people being like, oh, it's okay to ask these sorts of questions. It's okay to not understand everything. It's okay to like put yourself in that position where you may not be the expert at something, but you can learn still. And that has always been my way of like, I learned everything online, and I'm just trying to give that back in the same way of being like, it's okay, ask these questions. I didn't know everything when I first started. You don't have to either. But that really shouldn't be a thing that stops you from starting.
I love that as well, because you were talking about how earlier you're like, well, if I was in your position, I'll be too introverted to ask those questions. And now your whole content is around you asking those questions, but you're asking them to yourself, which I think is amazing, because there'll be a lot of people I think, because personally, that's how I learn, right? Like, I like to ask a lot of questions. And that's why I like your content as well, because from my brain or my point of view, it's more of a practical thing, because you're not just going, okay, we're going to talk about vibrance and saturation. This is what vibrance and saturation, like, you give it a use case and say, hey, I'm editing my photos and, I see when I change the vibrance that the colors are changing. And then also when I change the saturation, sorry, this is the one that I didn't know. And then you're like, well, the vibrance will change, and I've already forgotten, certain parts of, midtones or shadows, but then saturation is the whole color image overall. Please correct me on that, because I'm pretty sure I got that wrong.
Yeah, so the vibrance just changes the midtones, and it protects the skin tones as well, which I think a lot of people were confused about. They didn't really know. So if you change the vibrance, you don't impact the oranges and yellow and red tones as much as the greens and blues. So that's why the vibrance, if you can slide it all the way, and it doesn't have as much of an impact, because it's only affecting those tones in the middle.
Yeah, great. And so that was the one where I was like, ding. I was like, I've been doing this for, 10 plus years now. No idea. I'm like, I just look at the image on Lightroom and I change the colors and look at it and go, okay, that looks nice to my eye. So it's been great binging some of your content to actually understand the theory behind why I move particular slides. And look, a lot of people want to be a content creator, right? How long at the start did it take to get that traction? Because I think a lot of people go, look, I put in a lot of effort. I'm not really, gaining many followers. I'm out. Like, how did you overcome that?
Well, it was hard. As I said initially, I started probably early last year, and I said to myself, look, I'm going to do it every day for a month. And this was back when I was creating content targeted towards people who were engaged, like my ideal clients. I was like, I'm going to make content around how to plan your wedding, what to do around photography, how to book certain vendors, and I'll make a piece of content like that every day. And I did exactly what you said before, and just spoke to camera and just said, here's how you do X, here's how you would do Y. And it didn't really gain a lot of traction, right? I may not have been the right type of person, and I may not have like my style might not have worked with people. And I sort of gave up on it for a long time. I was like, I've got work. I don't need to sort of focus that hard on this. But then when I decided to go back into creating something else with content, I was like, let me go again for every day. Let me go, like, I want to put as much, because I think the biggest thing with content is like, it's very random, right? Like, you can't guarantee success with it, but what you can guarantee, what is in your control is how much you're creating. So I was like, I'll do it every day and throw everything at the wall and see what sticks. And I was trying out different styles. And one day I think I got one that, like, I was getting in the beginning probably 300 views on every like video. One day I got one that got over 1,000 views, and I was like, "Ooh, this like style might be the go." So then I went back in on that style and then recorded more in that style, and they seemed to be doing well. And then I was like, how can I change up the way that I'm asking these questions? Because at that stage, that's when I started the asking questions back and forth, because I kind of realized that was what was working. And I was like, how can I then change the way I'm asking the questions? And I asked about more broad things that could relate to more type of people and anyone that was just starting photography. And then I got one that did really well. And I think that was after about like a month and a half of going every day, that I got one that did pretty well. I think it did like 30,000 views or something. Like, I was like, wow, that was enough of a spark for me to be like, this is working. If it only goes every like 30 to 45 days, that's okay. I can keep throwing stuff at the wall. And if one in every 30 goes well, I'll be able to sustain this. Like, and eventually you'll grow an audience to a point where you've got enough people through the door who like your style that will stick around. So that was me. Yeah, I was just like, in the beginning, throwing everything I could out there, like as much as I knew. I think I look back at those videos now and I'm like, I probably didn't understand as much as I know now, but that didn't give me a reason not to continue, because I always knew who I was targeting. I was targeting the person who I was back then, and I was clear on every video has to be targeted to that person. If it's not interesting to that person, I'm not going to make that. I'm not going to make that content. So I knew who my target market was.
Amazing. And were you using any particular hashtags or anything, or you're just purely uploading to your Instagram Reels and just letting the algorithm do its thing?
I don't know about hashtags as much. I've always used hashtags, but I don't think they actually work as much. Like, I was using like photography hashtag, like very broad hashtags. It wasn't anything overly interesting. And I think the more I've gone about it, I don't think hashtags are that important. I was really leaning into how do I craft a video that's interesting, because I think that's the most important, is being able to retain people, especially on the swipe these days. There's so much content out there. Like, how do you hook people? How do you get people to stick around and actually care about what you're talking about? So that was where I focused most of my energy, was on the start, and how do I ask a question in a engaging and but intriguing way that's going to hold people. So I think that was one of the most important things. But then also having an answer that was like, wow, this guy knows what he's talking about. So sort of contrasting those two, of like opening it up to allow people to feel like this is something that they want to be a part of as well.
Yeah, great. And are you? I think I've seen you're working on some new stuff that you're going to be dropping soon. Is that online course, or what did that sort of look like? I think I had a peek at one of your stories where you were talking about it.
Yeah, so I'm working on an online course. I'm doing some in-person workshops as well. Hoping, it's all brand new to me, but I'm like, I want to be able to put something out there. I want to be able to help people more in depth. I know that I do content on Instagram and on TikTok, but it's very small. I really learn by longer form content. I want to be able to give that to someone else. So being able to create a course around editing, about how to start a business, that type of stuff is going to be really cool. in-person workshops is going to be really new to me because I do everything online. So, in person is going to be an interesting style, and I'm going to try that out. As I said, I'm not afraid to change if I don't enjoy it. Like, it could be back to the days of like working with small children again, and I don't love it. And I get to the point and I'm thinking like, oh, that's not for me. I'm completely online. So trying out different things and just trying to see what works. And hopefully if it can help one person, then I'll be very happy.
Yeah, amazing. And I think it'll be great to see that. Like, I think so many people are going to be interested, not just in the editing, but also, the how to get started. Like you said, very important. Reach out to an accountant. Outsource all of those sort of things. Get a professional to do it, because otherwise, I mean, you studied math and you're still like, look, I can add numbers up, but it doesn't mean that I know taxes. Public liability insurance, ABN, superannuation tax. So no, that's amazing. Well, look, those are all the questions that I had. Thank you so much for taking us on your career journey. As mentioned, everyone, I'm going to put Mike's Instagram down below. That's where I take it that they can follow to find out about these courses that you've got coming up and the in-person workshops.
Absolutely, yeah. Instagram is basically my main platform these days. Also creating a new website at the moment as well for my educational content. So hopefully that's going to be out pretty soon. So yeah, that would be nice to be able to allow people to follow along. Also rejigging my own sort of podcast as well to be able to give a lot of like long form conversations, just like the one we've had here, because I think that is so important to being able to hear the small little in-between things that aren't as scripted. So yeah, that'll be really nice.
I'll make sure to link the podcast as well. You'll give me all those details.
I will, yeah.
They'll all be, but I've always wanted to do this. They'll be below.
Yeah, they're below, up, I don't know, whichever one they are.
Below, up, left, right, I don't know. I haven't planned it yet.
Up here on that corner, I don't know.
Yeah. But thanks again. It's been great chatting with you.
No worries, Sam. Thank you so much for having me. Well, that is the end of today's episode. I really hope you enjoyed listening to this conversation half as much as I enjoyed having it. If you did enjoy today's episode, I would really appreciate it if you did leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or a 5-star rating on Spotify. Or if you're watching over on YouTube, give us a thumbs up and leave us a comment down below to let us know that you did enjoy this episode. Also, feel free to share this episode on Instagram and tag me at Mike Jeffrey Photography so I can reshare them on my stories. And also message me and let me know who you would love to hear on an upcoming episode of this podcast. I've always tried my best to be able to have conversations with people who are in the creative space and people that I think would be a good fit on this podcast. And I would love your input as well. In a very privileged position at the moment where, I'm able to reach out to people and have them on my podcast and have really interesting conversations with a whole range of people in the creative space and talk about their creative journey. So if there is anyone you would love to hear from, please let me know and I will do my best to try to get them on the podcast. At this time, I would also like to acknowledge the first creatives of the land on which I am recording today, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people of so-called Australia. As we tell stories of today, I just want to reflect on how First Nations people here and across the globe have guided and informed our understanding of the creative journey. But until next week, friends, have a lovely week and I will speak to you all again next Monday. Bye. Editing and post-production on this episode was done by Mossy Media, and music was created by JWPATON.
Hey Mike.